Wars are a series of calculated gambles, and back on May 10th, Russia took a major one by launching a new offensive coming from the north. Now, as the calendar moves into July, we are about to see whether it will pay off, or if it will ultimately reveal itself as another self-inflicted setback for the Kremlin. Of course, you can mitigate self-inflicted setbacks with the help of today's sponsor, Incogni. More on them in a minute. For now, the theater is Kharkiv, and a daring attempt by Russia to thin Ukrainian lines and open up further opportunities along the Eastern Front. The catch for the Kremlin was anticipating how the United States would respond, and deeper dangers that may disrupt Moscow's theory of victory in this war. Sometimes it is less about what is actually happening on the ground, and more about the public's perception of military momentum. So, on tap for today, we will begin with a deep dive into that Russian theory of victory in this war, and how that was going up before the offensive began. Then we will recap what Russia intended to do around the Kharkiv region, analyze what has actually happened since Russian forces began pouring over the border once again, and then finish with the military risks and the political risks that the Kremlin is now facing. But we start with the Russian theory of victory, and, equivalently, the combined Ukrainian and Western theories of victory in this war. You know what? Let's just split the difference and instead ask, why is this war still ongoing? And the answer there remains, in part, the problem that we had on day one. Russia calculating that the West will not see the conflict through until the end, and that Ukraine will be incapable of defending itself without crucial aid from its coalition partners. It is the basic essence of lines on maps. Russia thinks that it will be able to take something out to here or so. Meanwhile, Ukraine thinks that it will be able to defend back to here or so, and it is really hard to get the parties to come to terms given that disagreement. Thus, at its core, this war is a test to find out who is right. You know, politics by other means and all that. The thing is, though, these expected outcomes do not exist in a vacuum. Rather, the actions, strategies, and campaigns that both sides pursue influence whether either side's expectation comes to fruition in reality. Thus, the goal for Russia is to adopt doctrine that maximizes the likelihood that the Western coalition falls apart. For Ukraine, it is the opposite. Adopt doctrine that maximizes the likelihood that the West will remain present for the long term. And once this war is over, Ukraine would like NATO and company to stick around for the foreseeable future. But do you know what you don't want to stick around forever? Your personal data on the internet. And Incogni, the sponsor of today's video, has some good news there. You may not realize it, but data brokers are collecting all the personal data that they can find, with implications ranging from more mundane problems like identity theft and taking advantage of seniors, to more bizarre possibilities like higher healthcare costs. Fortunately, Incogni is here to help. The folks over there will contact the data brokers, help remove your name from the listings, and then press them if they start dragging their feet. Afterward, Incogni will stay vigilant year-round to ensure that your name does not pop back up. It is an easy way to help stop fraud and identity theft before it starts, because goodness, that is a headache if it ever happens. So if you want to keep your personal data private, go to incogni.com/WilliamSpaniel and use code WilliamSpaniel, all one word, for 60% off an annual plan. Thanks again to Incogni, and head over there to disappear today. Okay, now that we have our lines on maps framework, let's set the scene on the eve of Russia's decision point to begin the northern offensive. For about a half a year prior, the headlines were looking upbeat for Russia. First, a Ukrainian counteroffensive with few quantifiable gains, from the end of spring to the beginning of fall 2023, and then Russia successfully taking the initiative thereafter. This was basically everything that the Kremlin could feasibly ask for. It reinforced the political narrative that the battle over eastern Ukraine was hopeless. Correspondingly, we started to see the first sustained period of skeptics in the West making real political headway. much to the frustration of Joe Biden's administration. The only good news regarding the political will battle was the $61 billion aid package that Congress passed in April. But the thumbnail of our coverage of that aid deal conveys the true feelings of the pro-Ukraine camp. Indeed, that was less of a cause for optimism and more of a bipartisan realization in Washington that Ukraine's military situation was untenable. It was the classic catch-22 for Russia that we had discussed back in March. Doing well on the battlefield might only induce a greater response from the West. However, the eye-popping number has only rankled American skeptics, and it has put more pressure on Kyiv to justify the outlay. Meanwhile, the more recent $50 billion loan to Ukraine, well, loan because it was effectively underwritten by Russia's own money, is more of the same. It gives Ukraine more tools, but it will not quell the skeptics' camp. With that, we get to what Russia was attempting to do up north. There was much uncertainty about the Kremlin's plan when the offensive began, but the benefit of about 2 months of hindsight gives us a clearer picture. Russia did not bring enough troops to capture Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city. That would require hundreds of thousands of them, not tens of thousands. So let's cross that one off the list. The other two options have more merit. This was a calculated gamble from the Kremlin to try to spread Ukrainian resources thin, with the added benefit of taking some territory that only had light Ukrainian defenses, and some option value to apply artillery and bombing pressure onto the city of Kharkiv itself, which Russia is indeed now opting for. What is the logic here? Well, it's less about progress near Kharkiv, and more about progress down here. It is an apparent feint, a thinly veiled distraction, with Russia really wanting to instead take the city of Chasiv Yar, located just west of Bakhmut. It matters to Russia because it sits on the high ground, about 500 meters ascending this way, and then 500 meters descending the other way, leading to all sorts of population centers. Basically, it is a prime way to turn Donetsk Oblast into a fully realized Russian possession. The Kremlin also believed that it had a big numbers advantage overall, so moving some of its own soldiers near Kharkiv would place a comparatively greater burden on Ukraine. There was also some extra incentive to get this done before all of the new US aid got delivered. Meanwhile, the calculated gamble part of this was taking advantage of Washington's restrictions on US weapons being used on internationally recognized Russian soil. Moscow had hoped that the policy would remain in place, thereby giving Russian soldiers a safe haven to attack from. Okay, now let's compare that to what has actually happened, and the military risks that the Kremlin now faces. Back to the map. Kharkiv is here, and the international border is here. Russia indeed stormed out a few kilometers across two separated segments along the line. What Russia had hoped to do was extend out to something like this. However, Russia's progress has stalled along both vectors. Indeed, it has basically stayed like this for a month. Part of that is because Russia miscalculated how Washington would respond. In particular, the White House ultimately gave the green light for Ukraine to start using US weapons across the line. So much for the Russian safe havens. Miscalculations happen, of course. Remember, war is a gamble. You win some, you lose some. And while there is a narrative in the West that Russia is only capable of making bad decisions, there have also been some high-leverage situations where Russia made the right call. Most notably, the decision to withdraw from Kherson in November 2022 to preserve manpower and buy time to construct the Surovikin defensive line that stifled Ukraine's 2023 counteroffensive. And at least so far, Moscow has not been proven completely wrong here. The White House still has not authorized longer-range missiles that can hit Russian airfields in the area, and Ukraine is paying the price for that. Nevertheless, all of the cost and time-saving benefits of leaving the remaining sites relatively unprotected turned into a brief liability for Russia, and now Russia has to respond with a combination of building fortifications and pulling back resupply depots. the latter of which is basically the last thing you would want to do, just as you are extending out your supply lines. Friendly reminder that logistics wins wars. Anyway, the military risk for the Kremlin is incurring massive casualties while trying to defend the territory, without the benefits of fortifications on the level of the Surovikin line. And indeed, there is some evidence that Ukraine has begun counterattacking. We'll see how that plays out. Meanwhile, Ukraine has stifled Russia's attempt to exploit the situation and go on the power play in Chasiv Yar. Now, it has been nothing like its name would suggest. Chasiv Yar translates to quiet ravine, but bullets have been flying there the entire time, and Russian troops are still on the move around the city, though they have not gone very far. Looking at the map, Chasiv Yar's city center is just barely peeking out there on the left. This is what the front line looked like at the start of the Kharkiv distraction, and this is what it looked like at the end of June. Overlaying the two, the difference is less than a kilometer. And that remains true even when we average out these other areas. You can get a sense of this by noticing that we are seeing individual houses from this elevation. Then again, to be clear, Russia is only a few kilometers from Chasiv Yar's city center, and there will be disproportionate problems for Ukraine if that high ground falls. So there remain military risks up north for Russia, but the net outcome of this is far from clear. The situation involving political risks is more interesting, though. Let's talk about public perceptions about what is happening in the north versus the east. Because of how slow progress has been in the east, it is not really a part of the conversation in Western media. You can find it, but you really have to be paying attention. Now, that might sound strange to you and me, but if you are still tuning into this channel into the third year of a war, then congratulations. You are in the top 0.1% of war watchers. The average person is more likely to guess that Chasiv Yar is Tasha's younger brother than know that it is a city under siege in Ukraine. And in case you are not convinced by that, here is the Google Trends comparison between Chasiv Yar and Kharkiv. And while that Tasha thing was an offhand joke, seriously, this is Chasiv Yar, and this is Star Trek: The Next Generation. TNG, a show that ended in 1994, literally a year before the lines on maps theory of conflict was created, still garners more interest than Chasiv Yar. Tasha Yar, a character who died in 1988, has been competitive with Chasiv Yar for the last month. I think you get the picture. It is Kharkiv that people care about, not Chasiv Yar. Well, except for people in West Virginia, where interest between the two is perplexingly split 50-50. If you have any idea why there is so much interest in Chasiv Yar in places like Moundsville, and yes, that is a real town, complete with its own fascinating documentary, check the link, it's great, please let me know in the comments. Anyway, back to the data. This is the spike in interest in Kharkiv when the offensive began. But note that it has sustained dominance over Chasiv Yar since then. Zooming out, the 2 points in the war where Western support for Ukraine was the most fervent have been 1. Ukraine unexpectedly surviving the first month, and 2. The fall 2022 counteroffensives. And it is hardly a secret why. Yes, lines on maps have become this channel's meme, but it was you guys who built it that way. And understandably so. It is the most straightforward way to interpret what is happening in the war. So, at the start of the invasion, when Kyiv did not collapse like everyone was expecting, suddenly everyone in the West was excited to support Ukraine. In the eyes of the international audience, no longer was resistance futile, so in came the weapons. And when Ukraine pushed back the following fall, and it became plausible that Ukraine could expel Russia from the country entirely, again, everyone in the West was excited to support Ukraine. With that in mind, let's imagine that Ukraine succeeds in pushing Russia out of the north, while there continues to only be slow movement in and around Chasiv Yar. Based on the earlier division of interest, you can imagine what the public perception of this will be. Yet another instance of Russian foolishness, and the inability to succeed in achieving minimal goals. Going back to the earlier discussion, if we think of this war as just being a really violent debate about whether Western resolve will hold, well, that is a massive gift express delivered from Moscow to Kyiv. Moreover, it comes at a time when Kyiv was not in any position to get a military win of its own. For Ukraine, 2024 was supposed to be a year of survival and reconstituting forces. Had Russia simply held steady, the possible upcoming narrative could have been that Washington was wasting its $61 billion now, and then de facto another $50 billion on a lost cause. And no, this is not an AI image of Putin. It is just him on a recent trip to Vietnam, presumably melting due to summer heat. Anyway, to make matters worse for the Kremlin, even if Chasiv Yar does fall, it is unclear whether it will offset the prevailing narrative in the West. Let's look at the territorial exchange data. Going back a year, things were tilting toward Ukraine. Fast forwarding to more recent months, now things are tilting toward Russia. But the key takeaway here lies in the scale of the axis. All of these exchanges are a pittance, and this spike is coming from Kharkiv, not the east. That's just what happens when both sides try to cling on to the territory to the best of their abilities. So even if Chasiv Yar falls, and this accelerates a ton, Russia is still fighting an uphill battle. Literally here, and figuratively here. To be sure, this all could still work out for Russia. It will not be easy, but there is no guarantee that the Kremlin will soon have to face the music. Thanks again to Incogni for sponsoring today's video. And if you enjoy learning about the war, you'll love my books on it. If you want to find a copy, make it so by checking the video description. Also, I recommend pairing it with tea, Earl Grey, hot. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care. Engage.